You walk into a room, and within about 30 seconds, you already know. You know the two people who argued before you arrived. You know the one who's smiling, but isn't okay. You sense what's being left unsaid, even when everyone's acting like nothing is wrong. Nobody told you any of this. You just picked it up, the way you always do, without being entirely sure how or why you notice things other people seem to walk straight past. And if someone ever called you perceptive or intuitive, you probably said something modest and changed the subject. Because from the inside, it doesn't feel like a gift. It mostly feels exhausting, like you're carrying information you never asked for and can't put down. Here's what nobody tells you about that. It didn't come from nowhere. Most people think intelligence is something you're born with. The kind we celebrate, measured, rewarded, put on a resume, usually comes from books, classrooms, things going reasonably well. But there's another kind, one that doesn't get measured, one you didn't choose to develop. It was built by something that happened to you. And the fact that you came out of it with this particular set of capabilities isn't an accident. It's one of the most well-documented findings in modern psychology. Psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Calhoun at UNC Charlotte spent years studying what happens to people after trauma, not the damage, which had been studied plenty, but whether suffering could also produce something. What they found surprised the field. Alongside the grief and the fear and the ways the world stops making sense, something else was happening in a significant number of survivors. People were growing. Not instead of the pain, not after it passed, while it was still happening. Stronger relationships, sharper awareness of what actually mattered, a kind of personal strength that people who'd never been tested simply couldn't access. Tedeschi and Calhoun called it posttraumatic growth, and the people who developed it weren't the ones who'd escaped the hardest things. They were the ones who'd gone all the way through them. When you go through something genuinely hard, not difficult hard, your brain doesn't just survive it, it adapts. One of the things it rewires most significantly is the system responsible for reading emotional information. There's a network called the salience network, your brain's threat and meaning detection system, constantly scanning and deciding what actually matters. The amygdala, the anterior insula, the prefrontal cortex, all working together to detect signals, read faces, sense shifts in energy, figure out what's really happening beneath what's being said. In most people, this system runs at a fairly standard level. It catches obvious signals. It misses subtle ones. Research published in Frontiers in Psychology in 2023 found that in people who've been through significant adversity, this network changes measurably. And when those changes are processed rather than buried, they produce something unexpected. They make you better at reading people. Not better in a warm, workshop-trained way. Better in the way someone who spent years in difficult terrain develops an almost automatic ability to read the landscape. You catch the shift in tone before the words catch up. You sense when someone is performing calm rather than feeling it. Most people walk through the same room and register nothing. That's not anxiety. That's your brain doing what it learned to do. Tedeschi and Calhoun identified 5 domains where trauma survivors showed measurable positive growth, not in spite of what happened to them, but because of how they processed it. Personal strength, the actual internal knowledge, not a belief, but knowledge, that you can survive things most people have only imagined. When something hard happens now, and you don't fall apart the way the people around you seem to, it's not because you're cold. It's because you already have evidence, new possibilities. People who'd been through genuine difficulty were significantly more likely to pursue paths they'd previously considered impossible. Almost losing something had a way of making the safe, slightly wrong version of life feel unacceptable. Deeper connection with others, not the surface kind that most social interaction runs on, but the kind that happens when two people have both been through something real and recognize each other within the first few minutes of a conversation. That depth can't be trained. It comes from somewhere specific. A different relationship with ordinary life, where a Tuesday afternoon with no particular significance feels like something worth noticing, in a way that doesn't quite land for people who've never had a real reason to consider what losing it would feel like, and a shift in what actually seems important, a quiet ability to tell the difference between what's real and what's noise, which doesn't come from reading about it but from having had to figure out what to hold on to when everything felt uncertain. None of these show up on a test. None get a grade. None of this means what happened to you was worth it. The pain was the cost. The growth was what your brain did to survive it. Those aren't the same thing, and it matters to keep them separate because there's a version of this realization that curls in on itself, where you start treating the growth as justification for the cost. It wasn't a trade. It was just what happened next. There's also a question underneath all of this that most people never ask. The same sensitivity that makes you good at reading rooms doesn't always turn off. It runs in environments where nothing threatening is happening. It fires when you're safe, when you're loved, when there's genuinely no signal that needs reading. And it keeps scanning anyway, because that's what it was trained to do. The sensitivity that makes you perceptive is the same thing that makes being in a room full of people feel like running a background process at full capacity, all the time, whether you asked for it or not. So the real question is, are you using what you built, or are you still paying for it as though the danger is still there? Those are different things. Most people who've been through something genuinely hard spend years confusing one for the other. That confusion is worth looking at directly, not to resolve it neatly, but because knowing which one is true changes what you actually do next.